Last week we made went through James 4th chapter verses 1, 2, and 3. From whence come war and fightings among you? Come they not hence even of your lust that war in your members? Ye lust and have not. Ye kill and desire to have, and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war and ye have not, because you ask not. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that you may consume it upon your lusts. That last phrase is very similar to the phraseology that we find in the story of the prodigal son. You remember when he got his inheritance and he went off to a far-off land and he spent it wastefully. That's what he's talking about here. Wasteful, useless spending. Selfish spending. I remember years ago when I graduated from George Washington University in D.C., the commencement speaker, and I can't remember his name, I think his last name was Bell, but he was an international correspondent. And he pointed out that and this was at a secular school, and he said, I want to talk to you about something that I feel is very important for your lives, graduates. And a lot of the people there were getting a postgraduate degree. And he said, I've spent 30 to 40 years of my life as a foreign correspondent. And this ties in, what he said ties in with this first part of this whole chapter, here on down. And he said, I have reported on or observed or followed all of the greatest leaders of the 20th century. He said the Russian leaders, the Chinese leaders, U.S. presidents, some, but mostly international. He said, I also followed the wealthiest men in the world. He had spent a couple of weeks in the shadow of Saddam Hussein back early in his political career. And he said, I want to tell you something that I learned after 40 years. He said, I never met a one that was happy who did not have a deep, abiding faith in God. It didn't matter how much power they had, how much money they had. You see, the ones who didn't have a deep, abiding faith in God were spending their time, their efforts, and their own money wastefully and egotistically on themselves instead of caring for other people. That's what brings us into this. And this is what he's trying to get them to understand. When they have not because they ask not, and if they do have, they spend it wastefully, or they ask for it so they can be wasteful. Spend it on themselves. So many people in this world think that God, in prayer, that God's just an ATM. When you need something, you go punch in your code and he'll give it to you. It's not how it works. It's not what God intends us to do, and that's not what he intends to do for us. In these next few verses, as I studied this, I really initially did not necessarily understand the connection between the first three verses and then what he starts talking about in verse 4. He says, Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. And I don't know about you, as I was reading this passage, I read verses 1, 2, and 3, and then all of a sudden, boom, he starts talking about being friends with the world. And I really didn't see the connection that he was making for us between what he said in the first three verses and what he starts talking about here. But I really believe after some study and looking through a number of different books and commentaries, people are much smarter than I am, they said the connection here is that when he talks about spending your resources on your own lusts and giving in to your own lusts, he says, you're becoming worldly. And you are destroying your relationship with God. And you are committing religious adultery. You're claiming to be, as a church, the bride of Christ, and yet you want to go hang out with the world. You want to go do the things the world is doing. You want to be wasteful. You want to party. You want to mess around with somebody else's wife or somebody else's husband, just like the world does, and think that you can still be a child of God. He's trying to wake them up. That's not how it works. That's not what God expects of you and I. Friendship with the world is when we start acting like the world, doing the things that the world does. I remember as a young lad, my mother used to tell all three of us kids as we were growing up, becoming teenagers, she said, don't ever date anybody who's outside the church. And we said, well, why? She said, it's easy. You're going to marry somebody you date. And if you're dating people outside the church, they don't have the same value as you do. And you're going to bring on yourself all kinds of lifelong problems. Because you see, you're becoming a friend of the world. Now, is it sinful to marry outside the body of Christ? No. But it's a warning. I've known so many people. Well, look at our young people. Out of probably every 100 young people that are raised in the church, I don't know, 70% of them fall away. Why? They were raised to know what was right. Because they started committing adultery with the world. Not literally, but figuratively speaking. They started doing what the world told them it was good to do. And they were slowly drug away from their relationship with God. They started living after their own lust. I know I said this before, but it's been so long. I'll say it again. We need to realize, and we don't often say this, and if you have a chance to teach our kids, our teenagers, they need to hear this. Sin is fun. Don't be fooled. I mean, let's face it. If it wasn't fun, nobody would do it, would they? I was telling somebody here last week that I hit my left thumb one time with a 2-pound hand sledge. Right on my fingernail part. And I really reared back when I hit it too. I wasn't a little tap. And you know what? That hurt like the dickens. And I decided then that I was never going to do that again. You see the cartoons where you see stars, let me tell you, that's not a cartoon. I hit that thumb so hard, I saw stars, literally. But you see, if sin were that way, none of us would do it, would we? If every time you did something sinful in the eyes of God, you suffered immensely physically, you'd learn real quick not to do it. But that's not the way sin is. Sin is attractive. It's appealing. It appeals to our lusts. It appeals to all of those things that we want to do. And for that reason, when we start living lustfully, we start destroying our relationship with God. And that's what he's talking about here in verse 4. You adulterers and adulteresses, know you not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God. Then he goes on in verse 5, says, do you think that the scriptures saith? Yeah,
I want some.
Go for it.
Not the world, but I wanted this part 4. When I was studying, thought I was going to share this time. That word, do you not know that friendship with the world, that world there, the word's in Greek cosmos. We get that word cosmos, like the orderly arrangement, the cosmopolitan, you know, the idea of that kind of, and so it's this orderly arrangement, you're loving of the world, that arrangement, those values, that kind of makeup the world's putting on. And like you said, exactly, everything else, 100% is that you start drawn to that, and you're forgetting that, God was the source of all that was good given to you, but you're lured by this makeup. And I know we need to lift up Phil Robertson, a different Phil, but I was watching a show one time, and he was talking to the young son, and he told him, "Oh, I don't think you need to date her. She wears way too much makeup." And Si's saying something like, "Well, you can hide a lot of sin behind that." And I thought it was so apt because a lot of
Was he talking about Tammy Faye Baker?
No, it's just the way they were teaching him, and you're thinking, the world can put on that makeup. Doesn't Hebrews 11:25 tell us that he'd rather suffer the affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasure of sin? Like you said, if it was just going to the dentist's office, getting drilled, no payment, we wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But I just thought that cosmos is.
And the really scary thing is, Satan isn't dumb. Yeah. Satan knows a lot too. Satan knows everybody in this room. And he knows every button that he can push in your life to get a reaction. I mean, he knows if you've had a problem with alcohol or drugs in your life, he knows that button is there. And when the time is right, he can poke it. Now, you may resist him. But I'm told by those who've had that problem that desire, the temptation, the attractiveness of it never really goes away. I've known people who were that way about their sex life. I mean, I knew a guy one time who just said, "I can't imagine why you would be married to one woman. There's so much of me to go around." That was his attitude in life. That he thought nothing of, going out with somebody else's wife and trying to seduce her. I've known women in the workplace that were the same way. One of my coworkers, when I worked for GTE at the Metroplex, right there, a group of people said, my husband better appreciate me, because if he doesn't, I'll just kick him out and find me another one. And what kind of an attitude is that to have in a marital relationship? If he doesn't do what I want him to do, he's out of here. But that's the way of the world. And that's attractive. I've known a lot of people in the workforce, like women in the workforce, who left their husband because they found somebody who had a whole lot more money.
Brother Phil, I know it says the adulteress gets its mind on that, but when you go through James, it could be any one of those sins that the world says.
Oh, absolutely.
Gossip. It could be pure and undefiled religion. You don't visit those in need. If you're not doing any one of those things, you think the world says it's okay to show partiality or favoritism or prejudice. The world says it's okay when they're trying to say it's wrong, but they still.
Absolutely. And see, we can talk about these things that we can all agree, things we talk about. We can all agree those things are wrong, right? I don't think there's anybody in here who wouldn't agree with that. But sometimes we're like the three preachers who went to a convention. And they said, preachers can't confess their problems to anybody else. And we're preachers. And the first one said, well, my problem is alcohol. He says, I don't drink very much, but about once a year, every 2 years, I just got to have a weekend off, and I just go to a town where nobody knows me, get a motel room, buy a bunch of booze, and I just get rip-roaring drunk for 3 days. And then I'm okay. And the second one said, well, it's the ladies. I could, every once in a while, And the third one just sat there. And after a while, the other two said, well, what's your problem? Come on, you certainly had problems in your life. He said, yeah. He said, I love to gossip, and I can't wait to get home. How often are we like that? Those big sins, we all agree, that's terrible. You bring up gossip. Have you ever done it? We all have. We can destroy friendships. We can destroy marriages. We can destroy all kinds of relationships. And you know what? Gossip doesn't mean that it's a lie. A lot of times we think if someone gossips, they're making up stories. No. If someone tells you something in confidence that's private between you and them, and you go and tell somebody else, you just gossiped. You had no right to share that with anybody else. Preachers, elders, deacons need to learn that lesson. I don't think we have a problem with it here, but I've known places where they would be counseling someone over problems in their life, and they couldn't wait to get home to tell their wife about it. Husbands, you will hear things in dealing with people, all of us, that is nobody else's business. It's not even your wife's business. And wives, it's the same way. You may be sitting down here in the multi-purpose room after ladies' class or something, and somebody will share something with you in confidence. Don't rush home and tell your husband. None of his business. That's gossiping. We often don't think of those things as being so terrible, do we? If you kill somebody's spirit, you might as well have shot their body. Because it will also cost you your soul. We can go into other passages at some point and study that, but we all know the passages that talk about the fruits of the Spirit and the fruits of Satan. Things like gossiping.
Well, the very next one is really one that we're seeing, because I think it sneaks up on you, pride. So when you go back to verses 6 and following.
Yeah. God is lustful for us. See, lust can have two meanings. Lust can be a good thing and lust can be a bad thing. We always think of it in our society in the bad sense. You know, somebody's lusting after somebody else. It means they have evil desires. But lust just means, in its most basic root, means that someone is very jealous of you. You are special to them. Each one of us is special to God. He is not going to share us with the other side. You can't be friends with God and friends with the world. God lusteth after us. He does not want us. He will not allow us to put Him in second place. We always have to have God in the first place in our lives. That's hard to realize. How many people in here are married? Do you know that God expects you to put Him higher than your spouse? And you tell most people, worldly people, that, and you go, oh, what do you mean? God expects to be in first place in your life. Higher than your spouse, higher than your children. It doesn't mean that you do not fulfill your obligations toward your spouse and your children. But if you're going to fulfill those obligations correctly, you better have God in first place in your life. If you want to have a successful marriage, you better have God first place in your life. Because if you don't, that marriage is probably not going to work out.
I'm still caught on the word lust. God, I'd rather give him jealous. He's jealous for us, because I think that because it shows that root in maybe wanting something because you don't want to share, but the idea that I can't coincide.
Well, lust is one of those words that, we use differently today than the way it was used in the original English. It's like gay. In the 1950s, you could look at some guy and say, well, he's a gay fellow. But that meant he was happy. You wouldn't do that today unless you wanted to get punched in the mouth. Okay, words change meaning. That's why the first best tool that you need to study the Bible is a good dictionary. So you can go back in a good dictionary, and if you're reading King James, what did the word mean in the days of King James? And then have maybe a Greek dictionary. I happen to have what they call the King James Plus on here that has the my brain's dead tonight. The numbers that take you back to the Greek word that was actually used in the original text. and then gives you a definition of those words in Koine Greek. What did it mean in the days when the original author wrote it down? To try to take any changes in time in meaning out of the word and to put it into a context. And that would always be my second recommendation for someone, is to have that. Because if you have that, there's not a passage in the Bible you can't understand. There's some passages in the Bible without that you're probably going to struggle with.
You're right. It said a feeling of strong desire for something, but all the other ones at first made it seem to have a sexual connotation.
Yeah, and that's where we have it today.
Yeah, but it says the example is a pregnant woman lusting for pickles and ice cream. Oh, that's a great example.
Now, Dr. Sandy, what was Dr. Pepper?
Cinnamon crave.
It was Dr. Pepper and something else, whatever else was. She never wanted to eat it again. But you see, God can give us more grace. That's what he says in verse 6. What's grace? Unmerited favor. Grace and mercy go hand in hand. Grace is what God gives us we don't deserve. Mercy is what God keeps back from us that we do deserve. God gives us his grace. He gives us things that we don't deserve. We're not good enough. We're not righteous enough, but God gives them to us anyway. And then when we do wrong, frequently God withholds the punishment. That's his mercy. He looks down on us in mercy and allows us to repent. And he wipes it out because of the blood of Jesus Christ. When we go before a judge in our country, when we beg for mercy, we're probably not asking the judge to not give us any punishment. We're just begging for a lesser punishment. God is willing to wipe it out. Blessed is the man to whom God does not impute sin. God doesn't put it on our record. Then he goes on and tells us how to do this. How to avoid associating with the world, being trapped by the world. He says, submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. How do we submit to God? Your thoughts? I know Jeff's got to have one. He's just waiting there. Hebrews 5, verses 8 and 9. Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation to all them that obey him. How do we submit ourselves to God in obedience? We learn it. Just like anything else. It's not some magical formula. Somebody's going to wave a wand over your head and all of a sudden you're going, oh, I'm going to do what God says in all things. You have to learn to do it. And it takes study. It takes devotion. It takes concentration to reach that point where you are perfectly submissive to God, or as much as we can be. What does that, but I'm going to ask again, what does that mean? Does it mean that you do what God tells you to do if you agree with it? It doesn't matter whether you agree with it or not. Does it mean you do what God tells you to do if you like it? Actual, in practice in our life, submission occurs when you do something that you don't agree with and you don't like. Now you're really being submissive. You're saying, I would not do this on my own. It's not what I would choose to do. But God told me to do it, so I'm going to do it. If God calls on you to give up your worldly friends that you've had so much fun with for the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, you probably really don't want to do that, do you? They're your friends. They're people you used to go partying with. God says, no, that's the wrong kind of people. You need to give that up. Doesn't mean you don't try now to reach someone with the gospel, but it means your relationship with them has to change. 1 Peter, the first chapter, starting in verse 14, Peter says, as obedient children, not fashioning yourselves according to the former lusts in your ignorance, but as he which called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation. What's conversation mean? Conduct. It doesn't mean to talk. It means how you live your life. And you notice he says, in all manner of conversation. In other words, in every single aspect of your life. You should be holy because God is holy. You probably work for somebody. Most everybody here, unless you're like me and old and retired, you work for somebody. I'm going to tell you right now, if you're a Christian and you work for somebody, that person should be recognizing you, whether they say it or not, as the best worker they've got. You should be the one, I'm not saying you may not be the only one, but you should be the one that works for the boss, and the boss knows he can trust you with anything. He could hand you the store's proceeds and ask you to go deposit it in the bank tomorrow, and know that every penny would make it to the bank. Because you're that kind of person. If the boss gets sick, you work for a small business, the boss gets sick, you should be the kind of person the boss looks to and says, I'm going to the hospital, and I'm going to have surgery or something. I'm going to be out for maybe a month, 6 weeks. You should be the kind of person that he can turn to and say, I'm going to leave it in your hands. This is my livelihood, but I know that you're the kind of person who will take care of it. That's what he means, in my mind, when he says, in all manner of conversation, in every single aspect of your life. You see, church isn't about being faithful to God, it's about coming to church. Your Christianity starts as you go out the door, not when you come in. When we come in, we're just going to celebrate. We worship God. When we go out, we're going to do what he tells us to do. And we need to draw near to God. Hebrews 10:22, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from the evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. How do you draw near to anybody? Yeah, you screw over there by your sister. No, he's talking about getting close to. Not in a physical sense, but in I want to say a personal sense or a relationship sense. Can you draw near to somebody if you don't know them? If you're not trying to know them? If you're not trying to know more about them? You see, that's what drawing near to God means. It means you start wanting to know more about God. You want to be closer to him. To be closer to him, you're going to have to know more about him. You're going to go back and study the Old Testament to see how what God's relationship was with people in the Old Testament. You're going to look at Jesus and his relationship with people, how he acted. And as you start to understand what he did, and perhaps in some cases why he did it, you're going to get closer to him. Now back in the 80s, people were wearing bracelets that said WWJD. Most of them didn't have a clue what they were doing. What would Jesus do? It's not quite that easy. Because if you actually go to the New Testament, you find you study the life of Jesus. Jesus did everything from forgiving people who were wanting to kill him to fashioning a whip out of cord and driving people physically out of the temple. Most people who had the WWJD bracelets just thought it was all about, loves and cuddles. They didn't understand that other part of Jesus that said, I will not tolerate evil. Period, end of discussion. If you're evil, I'm going to say, if you're evil, you're out of here. That's what God's going to say. In the day of judgment, a friend of mine once said, In the day of judgment, have you ever been fired from a job? You ain't never been fired. Now, God's going to fire you in the day of judgment. Because you see, He laid down what He expects us to do. And He's willing, because His grace and His mercy, to forgive us, because we're human, we make mistakes, as long as we're penitent. But guess what? If we're not, we don't stand a chance. We have to draw near to Him so we understand His expectations for us. And that's hard. We will probably reach not probably, every one of us, I believe, will reach the end of our physical life on this earth. Whether we've been a Christian for 10 years or 60 years. And if you're a faithful child of God, on your deathbed, you will be able to say, I wish I knew Him better. I wish I understood Him more. I wish I was closer to Him. And if you're a faithful child of God, you will. If that's your desire, you will. Because at that point, you're about to enter the eternal realm. And you will see Him face to face.